Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jenny McPhee, and I'm on the faculty at the School of Professional Studies, where I'm an assistant clinical professor and academic director of continuing education at the Center for Publishing and Applied Liberal Arts. I am also co-chair of the Women's Leadership Presidential Forum, along with Karen Jackson-Weaver, Senior Associate Vice President of Global Faculty Engagement and Innovation Advancement. It gives me great pleasure to partner with the School of Professional Studies, the Office of Global Inclusion, Diversity and Strategic Innovation, the NYU Center for Black Visual Culture, and NYU Africa House to bring you this afternoon's extraordinary event. I would also like to thank Josh Murray, Monica Estrada, Dr. Autumn Rain, and their teams for all their hard work in pulling off this event. So I will introduce our illustrious participants in a moment, but first I would like to begin by acknowledging that NYU, both in New York City and as a global institution, is located on unceded lands and was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples globally and of the historically marginalized communities, those who are known and unknown to us. At NYU, we continue to address these legacies as we continue our work to both recognize and dismantle systemic exclusions. Please join me in 5 seconds of silence in gratitude and recognition of those who have come before us and laid the groundwork, and also for current and future generations who continue to pave the way for us to be here today. We are appreciative and respectful of these foundations. We are extremely fortunate to have with us here today for our fireside chat Dr. Makaziwe Mandela and her daughter Tukwini Mandela, in conversation with Angie Kamath, Dean of the School of Professional Studies. Dr. Makaziwe Mandela has had a full and varied career that has involved working for several companies, academic institutions, and boards in South Africa and abroad. I will highlight only a few of her many accomplishments. She developed a substantial investment portfolio with Nozala, a women's investment group, which focuses on the economic empowerment of women in South Africa. She spent several years working for the Development Bank of South Africa as executive manager of corporate services. Dr. Mandela is currently the chairman of House of Mandela, a business she started with her daughter, Tukwini Mandela, in 2010. She is also director of the House of Mandela Family Foundation, established in 2017. Dr. Maki has recently released a beautiful, powerful, illustrated book entitled Mandela in Honor of an Extraordinary Life. The book is the most definitive portrait of Nelson Mandela to date, revealing the man behind the anti-apartheid movement that changed the world. And I encourage you all to have a look at it and buy it at your nearest bookstore, independent bookstore. So Dr. Mandela's daughter, Tukwini Mandela, received an international education from a young age as she accompanied her parents around the world for their work. Ms. Mandela returned home to South Africa, where she obtained her degree in social work and a certificate in advertising account management. Ms. Mandela has held senior marketing positions at the First National Bank, RMB Private Bank, Nortel Networks, and ABSA Wealth and Private Bank. While working in the UK, as we can tell by her fabulous dress, she studied at the London College of Fashion. She is currently the marketing director for House of Mandela. Our interlocutor this evening is our dynamic and enterprising Dean of the School of Professional Studies, Angie Kamath, who in just over 2 years has transformed the school with her intrepid and visionary leadership. During her long and distinguished career in both government and higher education, she has fostered partnerships with industries on skills-based education and workforce development, and she has brought her considerable expertise and electric connectivity to NYU. A champion of many things, notably women's leadership. She herself was named one of New York State's 100 most influential women alongside Kathy Hochul, Letitia James, and AOC. She was also cited as one of New York's top power players in education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Makaziwe Mandela, Ms. Tukwini Mandela, and Dean Angie Kamath.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thank you so much to the Office of Global Inclusion, Africa House, and the Women's Leadership Forum. We're really pleased to be here today, and thank you so much for coming to this incredible opportunity to hear from Dr. Makaziwe Mandela and Tukwini. This is a very significant month for the Mandela family. 30 years ago, yesterday, Dr. Nelson Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk received the Nobel Prize for their momentous work bringing a peaceful end to apartheid in South Africa. 21 years ago, in 2002, NYU President J. Oliva presented the NYU Presidential Medal to President Nelson Mandela, just next door in Bope's library, and we do have 2 pictures for each of you for that momentous occasion. And it's remarkable that we can all be here today with 2 generations of Mandelas, and we look forward to hosting future generations of Mandelas as well. We could easily spend a whole day or a semester speaking on leadership, on gender equity, on entrepreneurship, on social activism, racism, and peace. But alas, we only have an hour. And so I will begin the conversation, and as you will all see in a few moments, these talented, ambitious, visionary women need little prompting to share their ideas on what would make the world a more fair and just place. So welcome. And please, for all audience members, we are going to have ample time for questions. So start thinking of your questions now, and looking forward to engaging all of you shortly. And so earlier today, we had a lunch with a number of students, and we spoke about torch-bearing. Tukwini, you really talked so purposefully about torch-bearing and building on past generations' successes and legacies. And Dr. Maki, you talked a lot about the duality of growing up in both the limelight, but also sharing that spotlight with others. And so with that context, I'd love to ask the first question to you, Dr. Mandela. Many books have been written on your father, and would love for you to share with the audience what brought you to write this book at this moment now, and how the perspectives are different and unique.
Well, thank you for that, Angie. The decision to write a book about my father was suggested, I think, by Jamie, but I didn't want to write a book on Nelson Mandela, the political man. I told them straight that if they want me to write a book like that, I wouldn't write a book like that. That's not me. I always wanted to write a different book that tells a fuller story about Nelson Mandela, because I didn't know him and I didn't relate to him as a politician. I related to him as Mandela the man. The father, I wanted to write about the son, that he had a sense of place, he had parents, he was brought up in a rural village with customs and traditions and values of the Xhosa people, and that those are the things that shaped him to become this great statesman, and basically to show that my father was not always sure-footed in terms of the choices that he made in life. When he grew up and went to university, all he wanted to do was to be a lawyer and be able to provide a better lifestyle for his mother and his sisters, but life did not allow him to do that. Later in life, when he was released, he was able to improve the conditions of his sisters who were living, but his mother, who he was very close to, had already passed on. And so this book is really truly a journey about Nelson Mandela, the human being, and what shaped him, the challenges he faced as a human being. And I think for me, the important thing about this book is to show that my dad came from humble beginnings. He was a simple man. But once he set himself the goal of fighting for the liberation of black people in South Africa, nothing could stop him from actually going on the road. And he did not do this alone. I want to emphasize that. My father always spoke about a Gloria we, which means he worked together with some of his colleagues. He wasn't a politician. My father only was introduced to the horrible conditions of apartheid when he flew from Transkei, escaped from Transkei to Johannesburg and worked in the mines. Most people don't know that my father worked as a security guide, a security person in the mines of Johannesburg. So that's where he first saw how black people were treated in the mines, the conditions that they worked under, and the living conditions that they experienced, that it truly hit him. And it was Walter Sisulu who actually recruited him to actually join the African National Congress. And he was his mentor and his best friend until Walter closed his eyes. But also, Dada learned a lot through life. And the fact that when he was in jail, he was able to reflect on himself and reflect on the struggle for liberation. And I think that's when he decided that if he was going to be angry and bitter about life, there's not much that he would achieve. And that the only way for them to actually achieve a new dispensation for South Africa is really to get into dialogue with what you call your enemies, and also to be clear about what you want out of life, and to learn to forgive the sins of the past. I know for me as a daughter, it was very difficult to understand why Tata would forgive people who had incarcerated you for 27 years. But I think, as Tata says, it takes courage to forgive, because when you stay angry and bitter, you only poison yourself. And I think that's why I wanted to write this book and make clear the message about how Tata lived as a human being instead of a politician.
Thank you. And Tukwini, you've talked about the important role that you play as a torchbearer, about really carrying forth the legacies from past generations and making sure that that continues. Could you speak a little bit more from your perspective about the leadership lessons that you hold with you and that you bring forth as a torchbearer for the family?
So I wrote an afterword for the book. And when I wrote the afterword, I didn't show it to Mom. I just sent it to Sam. And then Mom said, "Don't you think you should tone it down a little bit? It's really, really strong." And I said, "No, I won't tone it down." And the reason for that is because I wanted to emphasize the dangers of leaving your lineage and your legacy to be run by other people who are not members of your family or who don't have an affinity with your family. That's a sure way of destroying your legacy in its entirety. I think my family and I, especially my cousins, we've always battled with the notion that other people would say that they knew our grandfather far better than we did, which we always thought was nonsense. I think we had a lived experience of who my grandfather was in private. They may have seen him in public, and they may have had little glimpses of him, but they didn't really know his essence. We knew my grandfather's essence. When my grandfather came out of prison, he learned about the world through our eyes, through his grandchildren's eyes, because with his children, it was a little bit tense. And as grandchildren, we were far more open to him, and we were far more open to teaching him about things. Little things like we were watching movies one day, so my cousins and I would get together, we'd watch movies at his house and make incessant noise. So we're going to the local gas station to go and get junk food, and one of my cousins said, "Oh, Tukwini, please don't forget to get me some jelly beans." So my grandfather says, "What are jelly beans? Is this something you eat?" So I said, "No, don't worry, we'll bring the jelly beans to you now, you can taste them." I mean, he was alarmed at how much sugar we consumed. But for me, I wanted people to have that sense that, if you want your legacy to echo into the ages, if you want to honor your ancestors and the people whose shoulders on who you stand, it's important to control your own family legacy, and it's important to control your story. When we started with the House of Mandela, Mom always said, the story outweighs everything. It's all important, because without the story, the House of Mandela doesn't exist. People don't know things like my grandfather's name was not Mandela. We carry the name of a man whose name was Mandela. We come from a Tembu tribe, and King Ngubengcuka, who was a leader of the Tembus, had 5 sons, and one of those sons' name was Mandela. So we are the House of Mandela. We carry and espouse the values of the House of Mandela. So these are the things that I wanted to emphasize, and these are the things that I wanted people to learn. I also wanted people to learn that my grandfather didn't just fall from the sky. He's not this mythical figure that just magically appeared. He was formed by the values of his ancestral roots, by the culture of his ancestral roots. And he talks very strongly about that in The Long Walk to Freedom. And I always tell this story over and over and over again because I want people to understand what my grandfather's essence was. He talks about his father, who was a prime minister of Tembuland at that time. There was no such role, but that's essentially who he was. He was an advisor to the king. And the Tembu nation went through a crisis of leadership. And all the advisors were saying, oh no, you must choose from the great house. And my great-grandfather says, no, we can't choose from the great house because that man is not capable of taking the Tembu nation into the future. We must choose from a lesser house because there lies the real leader. And my great-grandfather didn't believe in maintaining the status quo because he believed the status quo was an enemy to progress, that we must always move with the times. And just because we want justice and democracy and freedom for ourselves, we must want it as much as for everybody else. So I think for me, the afterword was to get people to really think about these things, to really think about who my grandfather was, and to really think about my grandfather's leadership style, that he learned it from someone. My grandfather always said that, you know, even though his father died when he was 9 years old, he felt he had the same sense of fairness as his father. He felt that he was, you know, he got his sense of stubbornness from him. We Mandelas are very stubborn, and, you know, we are complete rule breakers. We never follow the rules. And so I think that, you know, it was nice for me as a grandchild to see where I got some of my traits from, for example. It was nice for me to see that my grandfather still remembered his father so vividly. It was nice to see that my grandfather was a complete mama's boy. He loved his mother. It was nice for me to see that my grandfather, you know, didn't, as my mom said, didn't think of himself as an icon. He always talked about a glorious we, that we don't get to, you know, we don't reach meteoric heights just by ourselves. We're people that help us along the way. He talks about Chief Jongintaba, the man that raised him as a child when his father passed, and that this was a man who had, you know, a lot of, he respected himself, and he had a lot of integrity. You know, people would come and lay bare their complaints to him. Some people were incredibly rude, some people swore at him, you know, but they would agree to disagree sometimes. But in the end, he as a king would make the final decision. But he would make that final decision having to be informed of the entire situation, for example, and so and having people feel that they were heard in this entire situation. So when he made a decision, people didn't feel like, oh, I wasn't listened to or I was sidelined. So I think I wrote the afterword because I wanted people to know those things, and I wanted people to know what is in my head and perhaps in my cousin's head, you know, to speak on their behalf as well.
I'd like to acknowledge Sam and Mark Beckman from DMA United. They're really the connectors here in terms of bringing our worlds together. And we talk a lot about storytelling, and you're both incredible storytellers. And so I'd love to have you both reflect as we kind of think about the world today and some of the challenges that we face, whether that's around climate change or gender inequality, poverty. How do we use the stories that you grew up on to think about how we might find a way out of some of the most constraining problems that we find ourselves in today?
I think for me, Angie, my hobby horse is that we need to truly speak to each other and hear each other. We as the Tembus and the Xhosa come from a culture, as Tukwini says, where the leader, a king, a chief, would surround himself with the community, and he would listen to each and every person, even if that he disagreed vehemently with that person, but that person would get the opportunity to say what he or she believed. And for me, we cannot create true peace, success, and development, and a sustainable future for ourselves, whether we look at the issue of environment or we look at gender disparities, without being prepared to truly sit around the table, engage in dialogue, and truly talk to each other and hear each other. I am not a believer that war is our answer. We seem to be hurtling from one crisis to the other, whether it's about the issue of differences in race, in gender. It is said that for us as women to achieve gender parity, it will take us over 100 years. But I think that it is important that as human beings, if we're going to save the human race, it is important that we promote the issue of dialogue, of speaking, of hearing each other. This is what my father preached. And he was not afraid to even chide American leaders in terms of starting war. He felt very strongly that he had to be the voice of reason in the world, and that war does not benefit anybody. And I think that we, as humans, have experienced the First World War, the Second World War, and after the Second World War, we promised ourselves that there would never, ever be a war like that, and yet there are wars in every continent of the world. And what are they yielding? They're not yielding progress. They're just forcing us to take 4 steps back as human beings. And yet, if we learn to talk with each other, we would find that there's a lot that is in common between us, because there's nothing really that differentiates me from you, except the color of our skin and where we are born. But we all have the same aspirations: to have a roof over our head, to provide decent meals for our family, to be able to afford our children a better life. And it's not through war that we will get there. War causes devastation, and there's not a single winner when it is war. And so for me, to address these challenges, we need to talk to each other at different levels of society.
Tukwini, picking up on that, I would love to, and changing gears a little bit, you work together with your mom in the House of Mandela, and so I'd love to hear what that experience is like. I think it's unusual for a relationship to work so closely, and yet it's so unique, and it's been over 10 years. And so it would be wonderful to hear some of the reflections in terms of communicating, bridging generations, and reflecting. We had a lot of students in the audience, and so I think hearing that lesson of entrepreneurship would be really helpful.
Yeah, my mom and I are similar in a lot of ways, so we fight a lot. and we don't always agree on everything. But I learned, when I first started working with my mom, I was really stubborn. I had a certain way, in terms of where I wanted to take the brand, and mom had a certain way as well. And for a while, we didn't necessarily see eye to eye. But I think, and mom has a certain, lived experience in terms of working as an executive in South Africa and working in an environment where black women were not necessarily welcomed. I had my experiences too, but I think once I understood, what the brand was all about and why she wanted to build this brand with me as her daughter, we started seeing eye to eye. And it doesn't necessarily mean that she and I agree all the time, because we don't. But I think what brought us together was the story of the House of Mandela and the lineage and the legacy. I think, when you, how do I put this? When you have a strained relationship with your father, and there's a process that you work through in order to come to some sort of agreement. And mom had this beautiful process with my grandfather where yes, there was tension between the two of them, but in the end they sort of worked things out between father and daughter. And I thought that was a beautiful experience, and it's like maybe that's mom's next book, actually. So she and I went through the same, it wasn't the same, but we went through a similar process in terms of understanding each other. I had to understand why she wanted to build this brand and why she thought that the history and the legacy and the lineage and the story was all important. And she had to understand that, because my cousins and I and my siblings and I approach things differently, we're more technologically inclined, and we see things from a different point of view, so we had to bring those 2 point of views together. And I think traveling with each other helped because we really got to know each other as people. I have a lot of respect for my mom, and I hope she has a lot of respect for me. And I think working with your parent, you get to know your parent as a person, as opposed to getting to know them as a parent. Because as a parent, when you're younger, you sort of like, you hear or worship them because, they do all these amazing things, and you think, oh, my parent can't do any wrong. And then as an adult, you get to know them, you think, oh, you're a human being. You have flaws too, and you have challenges too, but you also have dreams too. There's things that you want to do, as a person. So it was great to get to know my mother from that standpoint. But I also think what was important is the knowledge that she imparted to me as a person who had this lived experience as an executive Black female in corporate South Africa. And she just taught me how to deal, number one, with clients. She taught me how to deal with really difficult situations. She taught me to be measured because, I can be a hothead. And I think one of the greatest things that my parents taught me was to be a better global citizen, along with my siblings. So at my house, we always had people from all walks of life. I talk about this duality that we lived through with my siblings and my cousins. When at home, we had a pretty normal life, right? And then you go to my grandfather's house, you could meet Benazir Bhutto there. You could meet Fidel Castro there. You could meet Beyonce there. You could meet Jay-Z there. So you were living like on this parallel universe that wasn't necessarily real, if you will. And my mom was great in terms of, helping my siblings and I to navigate that yes, that's your grandfather's life, but that's not your life. And teaching me to stand in my own power, for example, and to be very emphatic about things that I strongly believed in, and to negotiate when it's necessary because you don't necessarily have to win all the time. And she just, taught me to be my own person, and taught my siblings the same thing. So I think working with your parent can have so many benefits, but it can have so many challenges as well. But I think, the most important thing is that they're trying to leave a legacy behind, and you're the next best thing, I guess, because you're their child. And if they don't leave their legacy to you, who are they going to leave legacy to? So, yeah, I think working with my mom has been great so far, and we've grown together as human beings. So, I'm 48 now, but my mom she still thinks I'm 12. And I always remind her of that. She goes, oh, you always be 12 to me. So I think, overall, the experience has been really amazing. It's been a learning experience. And people ask me, would I do it again? I'm like, yes, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Thank you. And so I feel like I need to give you a moment to respond. What has been the most interesting learning from your perspective of working with Tukwini?
I think, look, working with your child is both a blessing, and maybe there are times when it's a curse, because every generation thinks they know better, than you as a parent. But I think it has been a wonderful journey because we've learned together. And as a woman, I think that it has been easy for her to have a pillar of strength that is a mom, who's very strong, I'm very strong and very set in my way. If I want something, there's nothing that is going to stop me achieving what I want. And when we started the business, we started in the wine industry, which was a very difficult industry to penetrate because it's very white, male-dominated, although a great employer in South Africa. Most of the people who said, ladies, come along, we'll help you. Actually, it was a coded word. Come along, ladies, we will bury you. You'll never survive.
Or why don't you go and do fashion?
Yeah, but we subsequently learned by going to wine trade shows, or overseas, that other women elsewhere in Europe and everywhere, even here, experience the same kind of challenges entering the wine industry. And that's why, for me, the issue of collaboration, networking, discussing with people, because when you travel this life, you are helped by others, directly or indirectly. And the fact that we could connect with other women who were not in South Africa gave us the strength and the courage to say, no matter the challenges and the risk, we are going to persevere. And in actual fact, today they are surprised that we are still in the wine industry. We've survived, although difficult. And we are doing well in various markets. So I hope for her it has been a very good learning experience to work with the mother and to prepare herself for a world that is not going to lay the carpet for you on the ground, and that you have to strive and struggle to achieve what you want.
Thank you. And so now it's your turn. Would love to, we have, I think, about 15, 20 minutes to take some questions. So Liz, I see you. Do we have an extra mic? Yep, we have a mic.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Nganzi. I'm an adjunct faculty in the Center for Global Affairs, and I'm so excited to be here. I have a two-part question. First, what is your book going to be about? Because I know your book's coming, if it's not already underway.
There's so much that I want to write about, but I think my book will be about lineage and legacy, and what it means to control your own family's destiny, and what happens to families who don't control their destiny, and maybe impart some advice as to what they can do to maintain that. I think that will be my book if I write one.
I love it. And my second part is now taking my non-NYU hat. I sit on the board of the Court of Master Sommeliers Americas, and I would love to engage with you around the House of Mandela, because I definitely feel that our audience needs to know what you're doing, because they're all sommeliers who could recommend what you have to offer. So I don't know who I'd connect with, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. But thank you very much for this opportunity to hear from both of you. It's been incredible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia Meyer. I'm the Academic Director of the Center for Global Affairs. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And Dr. Mandela, thank you for the wonderful graduation speech that you gave yesterday. It was truly inspirational and inspiring. My question is, the world is facing a backlash against gender equality, against all the values that your father stood for and held dear: human rights, human dignity, and democracy. What advice would you give the youth of today to combat this backlash and to carry on the torch that your father in South Africa so proudly lit, and that you are carrying forward? Thank you.
Well, my father used to say that when you climb one hill and you are on top of that hill, you look around and see that there are more hills to climb. You take a pause, you revive yourself, you look for other people who work there, and you move on. You never stop. It's about perseverance. It's about recommitting yourself to the cause. And I think one of the things that sometimes frustrates me let me talk about gender, because I am a woman, is that we seem to be talking about the same thing, but the conversation changes and we use different ways to talk about the same thing, which is really the subordination of women in society. And I think that we have to learn also to celebrate what we've achieved, because our position today is not the same as 10, 15 years or 20 years back. And we should, as women, in whatever position that we are, tell ourselves that we are going to carry 2 or 3 women with us. And we often do not do that. But if we set ourselves that, look, I am in this position, like Angie is now a dean, a very successful woman. If Angie tells herself, and I'm sure she's doing it, I'm going to identify 2 or 3 young women and teach them how you navigate this journey to become an assistant dean and a dean, and how he has made a difference, how she has made a difference in his role as a dean, then I think we'll do a lot actually to penetrate and not have a backlash. There's always going to be a backlash because those who are in power, men will never give up power easily. They have to be forced, and I don't think we also need to change who we are as women and become like men to be able to be successful and make an impact. There's a lot that we have naturally given to us by God that we have to teach these men to be more compassionate. If we want a world where there's peace, we as women have got to lead because it comes natural to us. Teach them compassion, teach them empathy, teach them to nurture and care and be kinder and gentler people. We have the role, we have that role to play in this society. And we should never claim we are tired. If we are tired, we should take a break, but come back to the fight and not let go. I've said myself that I am not afraid of any man. I'm not aggressive, but I speak my mind. I'm not afraid to speak my mind, to have my opinion, and to demand a seat on the table when I deserve a seat at the table. And I think that's how we should continue as women. But we need to support each other at every step of the way.
Tukwini, and the book, and I really encourage everyone to look at the book and to purchase it. One of the traits that's talked about is courage, and so I'm curious about your kind of response to that in terms of there's a lot of cancel culture, I guess we call it here, and I'm curious about your response to Sylvia's question, knowing that I do think a lot of the work that your mom just described does take courage.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I have a real problem with social media and identity politics. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of who you are and where you come from and being proud of your language and your culture. But I have a problem when that is used to define who you are as a human being, as if that is the only measure of who you are. My parents and grandparents always taught us to be better global citizens and that we could learn from every culture. And that eventually forms who we are as persons. And we were not to identify ourselves by our race or our color or our gender, but who we wanted to become in this universe and what we wanted to contribute. So for me, I'd like to see a world where, yes, you come in the skin that you come in, but what ultimately do you want to accomplish in this world? What do you want to contribute to this world to make it a better place? And I don't think that we should exclude men in these discussions we have about female empowerment. I think they need to be part and parcel of the discussion and of the solution. I'll give you an example. I once was in a lift in a shopping center in South Africa, and there was this young couple in their early 20s, and they were arguing. His girlfriend was basically looking the other way. She didn't want to hear anything that he had to say. And then he says to her, without screaming, without shouting, he's very calm. He says, I don't like your behavior, and I sometimes think that you're not aware that the things that you do hurt me. Just like that. And I thought to myself, who are this boy's parents? Because his parents have taught him to communicate his feelings without screaming, without shouting, and without being abusive. Those are the types of men that we should be raising. That this world will become a better place when we all inhabit it, when we all have the same access to resources, and we all have access to opportunities. So for me, building a better future is not just about either or. It's about how do we work together and how do we use each other's strengths to build a better world.
Thank you. In the front row right here.
Hi, my name is Deborah Nyasha Peters. I'm from Zimbabwe. I have a two-part question for you, and I think maybe you can answer the first question and you can take the second. The first question is about the commercialization of your grandfather's legacy. I lived in Joburg for a while, and I go back very often. And the number 46664 is on everything. It's like over-commercialized. It's like a desecration of what the legacy was. I mean, there was pain and suffering in prison, and now you find it on everything. I've seen, that number on things that it shouldn't be on there. So what do you think of what's happening with that? And the second question for you, Mama, what do you think of our current leadership in Africa? I mean, I've looked across the continent, and compared to where your father came from, can you give advice to the current leaders to maybe share some of that vision?
Okay, so this is why I wrote the afterword to the book. I want, this was part of my angst, right? And this is part of my, siblings and cousins' angst, is that, we always felt like, people thought that they had a right to use my grandfather's name any way they wanted to, but we as his family and his progeny didn't have that right. And so I wanted to set the record straight that way. So please buy the book and read the afterword. I think, because my grandfather had such a huge name, people find it very easy to commercialize, right? And they don't, it's a way of making an easy buck, but they don't necessarily understand the backstory. And this is why we started House of Mandela. We wanted, that's the reason, because we wanted to deal with things like that. I think it's important to have, to know who my grandfather's essence was, number one. And there's a lot of people who complain to us who say, well, we've seen this person do that and this person do that. This is not genuine. Where is the family involvement in all of this? So for us, the House of Mandela is there to set the groundwork, if you will, to say to people, this name Mandela is more than just one man. This name Mandela is the culmination of a family struggle and history. The House of Mandela has certain ideals that we live by as a family. And this is how those ideals are translated into any product that we'll create at House of Mandela. For example, if a product doesn't fit a story, we just won't do it. We don't care how much money it could potentially make us, because ultimately, in the final count of all things, it's how this name will live in posterity and the legacy that it leaves behind. So I think for us, this will always be a constant battle that we'll have to fight. But I think, for my mom and I, it's important that we drive the story of our family through our the House of Mandela brand. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing is that there's no way that we can prevent the commercialization per se, especially, let's say, in Africa. But I think that the important thing is for us to set the standard. If you want to use Mandela, these are the parameters, and this is the way that you can use them. Because, as Tukwini say, you want to preserve the legacy. But of course, there's a battle, I think mainly in South Africa, about who owns and has the rights for the name. It's the family, it's the African National Congress, it's the state. But I don't think that we can actually prevent the commercialization of the name, because it requires that you have to police people all around the world. But we can set the standards. And I think that a lot of the corporate sector and multinationals, when people go to them and say, we want to use the Mandela, they want to know where are the Mandela, where are the authentic people who own this name. So at least that protects the name to some extent. But you're asking me about, you asked a second question about African leaders. Frantz Fanon, in his book called Black Skins, White Mask, says that those who are oppressed always try to emulate their oppressors. But also, the issue with Africa is that Africa is so richly endowed with resources. And because of that, it is easy for our leaders to forget about their own people, to be easily bought, basically. You look at a country like the DRC, which is richly endowed with gold, with cobalt, with uranium. In actual fact, the DRC has a lot of untapped oil resources under their forest. And because of its rich, it will never come right, because everybody is there, just pillaging. And I mean everybody is there. But our leaders are corrupted because countries like America, who will profess that they're democratic and they promote democracy, will support corrupt leaders in Africa because they want the resources. And so we have a problem. And for me personally, I do not believe in democracy per se for emerging economies like the African continent. I believe that if we are going to make a path into development and control our own destiny, we need what I would call benevolent dictators. And I'll give you one example. If you take a country like Rwanda, it's a small, minute country. Paul Kagame doesn't play. When Paul Kagame came into power, he made sure that his first port of call was to unify the Rwandese and create one nation. But also he instituted pride in being a Rwandese. With Kigali, when you were there, whether you're a visitor in a hotel, on a Saturday, he would come out, everybody would come out, and he himself would come out, they would clean the streets of Kigali, okay? And so he created some sort of pride, and he had a vision for 2030, what Rwanda would look like in 2030. And I think most of our, and Paul Kagame is very strong in people understanding their own culture, their own values, their own traditions and customs, because that's where you start. And so for me, at least a leader like Paul Kagame is giving me hope that things can change. Yes, a lot of people accuse him of being authoritarian and that he's stealing resources from the Eastern Congo, but many people are stealing resources of the DRC, and people are not complaining. So my father was a light in Africa, but I think that there were many leaders before him who did good for Africa. My father was not without mistakes, because I will tell you that the ANC, when they negotiated for political freedom, but they forgot one thing, that without us having control of the economy, the freedom becomes a hollow dream. As Kwame Nkrumah said, political freedom without economic freedom is a hollow freedom. And we are experiencing that in South Africa right now. So I do think that though people tell me America is an experiment, 400-year experiment, we are still in Africa in our infancy. And I think we will get there. I hope in the youth of Africa who are educating themselves, who are organizing themselves, throughout the continent, who are beginning to study the history of Africa and the current situation and seeing where things have gone wrong. Because if you don't understand your history, you will always repeat it.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for this inspirational conversation. My name is Rhythm, and I'm working towards a master's degree in executive coaching. Even though I feel you've partially answered my question, I just want to know from both of you, what do you think in today's leadership leaders need to be coached upon in order to have something great? You talked about corruption just in the last answer that you gave. So what do you think are the skills or the things that we need to coach leaders on in order to have a better and beautiful world? Thank you.
I think for me, we have to hold our leaders accountable. My dad said when he goes to heaven, he'll join the African National Congress. But my dad also said, if the African National Congress does to you what the apartheid government did to you, you have every right to boot it out, not vote it in power. I think we have to change, to realize that the power is with us, and that when we vote people who we know are not going to deliver to their own people, and we continue to elect corrupt leaders, we have to blame ourselves. It is said that citizens get the leaders that they deserve. So we have to use our voices, we have to use our vote to get the leaders that we want.
And I think there's I think self-awareness is a really important thing. And I think with the leaders today, they lack complete self-awareness. My grandfather always used to say that, he wasn't just a president of of black South Africans only, he was a president of all South Africans. And therefore the concerns of the South African nation concerned him. I think, I'll mention again, in the age of identity politics, I think leaders these days are very divisive. They pander to whomever is going to keep them in office. They don't care about the needs of the population. But I think that we as people who vote, as my mother said, need to hold them to account. We vote and then we give them our power. And we let them do whatever they want with our power. But we forget that the power is with us, that they can be removed from office if they don't deliver. So, you look at what's happening in the world today, and the fact that, we're almost behaving we're asleep. We're not challenging what is going on politically in our society today. We're not challenging the levels of poverty. We're not challenging the levels of injustice. Because, I'm concerned about my job and keeping my job and feeding my family, so I'm just going to move ahead and do what I've been doing. So I think it takes all of us to be concerned about our fellow neighbor. My grandfather really preached this concept of compassion for your fellow neighbor, that if you have freedom and justice, you must want that as much as you want it for your neighbor as much as you have it for yourself. So I think, being conscious and being compassionate is really important in the qualities of a leader and taking this world to the future.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Josh.
Hi, my name is Joshua Spodek. I'm an adjunct professor here and I teach leadership and I focus on sustainability in particular. You opened with saying how your father was, he really wanted to be a lawyer and provide for his family. You said to sustain the status quo is to prevent progress. And in the area of sustainability, overwhelmingly, people, when faced with what they're doing, say, well, but I have to be a lawyer and have to provide for my family. Or, what I do doesn't matter. And there's any number of reasons that people give for not acting. It seems to me he was the picture of someone who overcame these reasons not to act and acted. And I think he was one person who made somewhat of a difference. But people really have these protections. They will nod along and say, yes, we should act personally in every area. But the environment, no, individual action doesn't matter. Also, one of the things that he did, I believe he worked a lot with the people on the top of the hierarchy and was able to persuade them to recognize what they were doing and to stop. He shared the Nobel Prize. what can we do in the area of sustainability where it's so easy to buy a plane ticket, it's so easy to put the air conditioner on whenever we feel like it, that for us to say, yes, we can make a difference, we ourselves, even if it means we're not flying, even if it means we don't get the fast fashion and things like that. Is that too much to ask? What can we learn from your experiences and his?
You. Okay. My grandfather always taught us that, making a difference in the world is not about doing big things. It's about doing, small acts of kindness. So, if you see there are issues in your community that need to be addressed, why not get together with your community members and address that, as opposed to focusing on this global, huge problem that you're probably not going to have an impact in. Whereas if you're focusing on a community, that may have a snowball effect. Other communities next to you may see that, they've really done something about cleaning up their neighborhood, for example. They've really done something about feeding the elderly in their neighborhood. There's somebody who's looking after them. Or they've really done something about, improving the school in their neighborhood. Maybe we'll learn from them and we'll do the same thing. And I think that this is how movements grow, right? They don't grow because, people do these big acts, of kindness or activism. I think activism starts at home, and maybe you start with your own family, and with your own family it moves on to your own community, and from your own community it moves on to another community. That's basically what we were taught, and that's how you sustain and grow a community.
The issue of sustainability, for me, is sort of also a very difficult concept. What do we mean by sustainability? Are we talking about sustainability in terms of climate change, in terms of the environment? When you say, how do we stop people from flying, how else would people get from one destination to the other? Because even if you drive a car, I know that the electric car, but an electric car cannot take you from here in New York down to Florida, because you have to stop somewhere and charge the car. Are there so many stations developed? But I think that on an individual level, we can do things that affect the environment and not to pollute the environment, And as Tukwini says, that can have a domino effect if you start with yourself and start with your children. But sustainability also, for me, sustainability means you are creating a world that will live forever, for generations, which means you have to get rid of sexism, of gender differences, of racism. You have to get rid of hunger, of poverty. You have to get rid of viewing other people as different from you, because that's how, for me, you create sustainability. If you value your neighbor, if you nurture your neighbor, if you help your neighbor, that's how you create a sustainable community, neighborhood, and a society. And one of the things that I wanted to say about this issue of leadership, we always want to think that perhaps leaders are born. I think all of us have the capability to be leaders. All of us have the Madiba or the Mandela qualities within us, Gandhi or Martin Luther King qualities within us. When we take COVID, and I think we take this for granted, during the COVID years, no one leader emerged and said, let us help nurses and doctors who are taking the risk in terms of curing people. People spontaneously supported them. People supported old age people. They went to grocer for them. They made sure they are okay. So which shows that we have the innate qualities of being leaders within ourselves. Nobody stood on there was never a Mandela that says, hey, do this. Or a Martin Luther King or a Gandhi that says, hey, do. People just spontaneously knew that I had to help a fellow human being. And we fail to exploit those moments of greatness and kindness as human beings, one human to the other. And we forget about them, but we can exploit them to address any issue that we face in our communities.
Dr. Maki, Tukwini, thank you so much for such a memorable evening. You are clearly torchbearers. It is beautiful to understand and see how you are carrying forth the vision in a really authentic and different and visionary way. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. It's been a pleasure to spend the evening with you, and we really appreciate your generosity to share your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.